So he thinks,
Excellent.
Greetings.
Kaz, I'm a Marxist for decrying multiculturalism. How about that one? That's a new one for me. It's just
Yeah,
insanity. The shit that you hear from people 23
yeah,
hours
absolutely.
in, and you hear a new one. So what are your feelings? Like, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this as someone who's coming from more of like a libertarian perspective on this concept of, well, we owe it to someone. There's this moral imperative that like we have to share. Cultures are relative, and we have to share with everyone.
Nonsense, but let's explain why. So a lot of these leftist types that show up to your stream, and even pretty much actually everyone uses a fallacy. It's probably the most common fallacy in the world. It's called the stolen concept fallacy. I think objectivists are the ones that really started pointing to it, which is they say, indigenous people owned this land. You came in and you colonized it. Well, what do you mean by that word owned?
Owned. Yeah.
What does that word
Right.
actually mean? Do you have a definition of that? And when you dig into it, they don't actually believe in any sort of ownership. They believe in the right of the possessor, and they have this inverse outgroup preference where the victimized, the alleged victim, or somebody who plays a victim, is defaulting to be the owner of whatever thing is. I'm not subscribing to that ideology. I'm just describing
Sure.
what I think their actual belief is. So their ownership belongs to whoever declared it and then lost, meaning whoever was a conqueror, but
Right.
then lost a bunch of battles
Right.
and became quote unquote oppressed. And this is the entire sort of religion. And that religion is geared towards undermining what is the dominant global culture, which is the culture of the Anglo, of the British Empire.
Hmm.
And so it takes and it inverts all of the achievements, all of the comparative advantages of that culture compared to every other pretty much backwards, from my perspective, place in the world, and it tries to turn it inside out. But let's look at what is the actual concept of ownership. It is basically who is the first comer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what most people. That's what two kids playing around um, in in a sand pit when they're very small. That's what they learn, which is I made a sand castle, and then Joey, my pal, came in and ruined it. I feel unhappy. Well, why? Because what Joey did is he violated my agency. I have participated in creation, and this latecomer came in and knocked it over. I don't like that. And if I do it to him, he doesn't like that either. And
Hmm.
so now we have reciprocity, and we have the establishment of the basic legal system, which is we don't ruin each other's sandcastles. So that is the establishment of something, of some kind of a border that shows to another person, this is mine, I was here first, is the actual thing that we call ownership. Everything else is some kind of a false conception. And if the way you prove this is you try, well, what if it's the opposite? What if it's the exact opposite? What if I build a sandcastle, but it actually belongs to someone else? Well, that means I've already acted, I'm a criminal just by doing anything. By building a sandcastle without asking Joy and Jack and Jill and everybody else outside of the sandpit of what they want to do, I've changed things without consulting the potential true owners, which means I'm unable to act as a human. I have to just sit there and wither
Yeah.
and die. So that
Hmm.
doesn't work. But also, it falls to like it detonates logically because the next person who claims ownership can't do it because the next person can claim ownership who can't do it, and this is called a regression. It's like a failure. It collapses into nobody owns anything. It's just possession, which is what people often call might makes right. Just whoever possesses the thing is the rightful owner. Well, if whoever possesses the thing is the rightful owner, then the leftist or like the anti-colonialist critique is meaningless. We possess it, therefore we're the owner. If they come to possess it, we're going to be the owner. But really, that's not true ownership. So if we take this lens and we apply it to, let's say, American history, then how does it work out? Well, some of the territory was not owned, period, because even if some tribe declared that they owned it, they didn't create a border, they didn't establish it. People moved in, and the early stories we have with the colonists is that they start out trading. They sort of really historically they have some nefarious motives in South and North America, but the nefarious motives of like enslavement and so on don't work out for various reasons here in the North. And so a different type of relationship develops, which is a relationship of mostly trade, initially cooperation, but then also warfare. Why warfare? Because the natives are not Anglos. They don't have a theory of ownership. They are some type of primitive socialist communal thing where a tribe just conquers another tribe, have done so for millennia, and if you're not strong, if your braves are not strong, your territory is getting taken over. And that's it. As soon as you bury your ancestors somewhere, it's yours. And what's yours is like, how far can your raiding parties reach, more or less?
Mm-hmm.
So,
What's the name of the fallacy again?
the stolen concept. You're using something that you're claiming something you haven't established. Which is the real fallacy there is that when we analyze how you establish it, we notice that it's inconsistent, that it's basically meaningless, which is the sort of socialist conception of ownership is they don't have a conception, it's all possession.
Yeah, and one of the things you said, like, it's a great explanation. One of the things you said that resonated, they try to put you in this trap when you're arguing against this, that somehow it makes you a racist. To be like, oh, you're just advocating because of like European, Anglo culture. You're just but in reality, their very criticism is one that's
Yes.
based on taking out Anglo culture, which means to defend against it by its very nature means that they'll be able to say, you're defending a race or an ethnicity or a culture, which therefore makes you racist.
Yes. If that's the definition of a racist, I'm racist.
Right. That I agree. No, I think
But-
there are people that can embrace that culture and assimilate into culture that don't have the same ethnicity or race, but still
No,
that
exactly.
culture is worth preserving. So it's not racist in my definition of it, but if that's what they want to consider racist, then fine, fuck it. Yes, there
Yeah.
are cultures that are better than others and they're worth defending.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. And our culture happens to be one of the best, or the best. And yeah, it's just, I'm tired of playing, like, there are ways, like, I always appreciate talking to you, Kaz, because you're able to break things down at, like, sort of the philosophical underpinnings of it. Oftentimes, I think many people could reach the same conclusion that you're saying and just not be able to verbalize, but they understand the bullshit game that's being played, right? Like, you say, like, well, it's the Native American land, which ones? Right? Like, how far back we going? We just stop at the first Native American. What the fuck makes a Native American? What is there, like a skin color tone that we look at?
I'm a little bit older than some people in the chat. Does that mean that I get to evict you from planet Earth?
Yep.
I claim the whole thing immediately.
Yep.
Do you go away? You colonizer from coming out of your mother's womb?
Yep.
And so that's the leftist argument, basically. They're saying, oh, the entire, I'm a first comer. What's missing? Well, I haven't embroidered the entire planet. I haven't, you're not coming in from the outside, from some sphere, and showing up and seeing migrants not welcome sign. I'm not maintaining the whole thing. And so I can't claim it. It's, ownership is a very tricky concept, actually, like to fully grasp, because it's not, the Lockean conception is slightly wrong. This, mixing labor, sometimes people call it like mixing, working. That's not enough. So I can go and like, do something to nature, but that doesn't mean I'm the owner. in order to satisfy ownership, I have to communicate the exclusion of others. I have to say, this is a fence, and you, as a fellow English person, understands that, or from the same culture, understands that you don't walk over fences, even if they're like 1 feet tall. The fence is basically saying, somebody has this. You should ask for permission before you cross a fence. And this is the thing that's missing. Now, the inside of the fence could be a barren lot. It doesn't matter. It's not yours anymore. Somebody is maintaining that. The other thing is, you can't just build a fence to block off access to something you claim you don't own. It's forestalling. It's a bit more complex. But also, you can't fence in someone else, because you can't be the latecomer. You can't claim something. It has to be virgin or traded. Or, which is important in the American context, there is also legitimate conquest. How so? If somebody is a latecomer, shows up to you and tries to kill you or take your land, which is the same, then there's a logical proof that shows that they can't complain they can't claim rights after that point. And so the third way to gain territory is to take it from a conqueror who is a latecomer. Because what you're doing is you're defending, but then you have retribution based on what was their intent.
Right.
The manifest intent was to kill and conquer. They can't object to being killed and conquered. And that is the majority of the way how the Europeans took land from Indians. Obviously, some of the United States was stolen, either by the U.S. government from the Indian tribes or by the U.S. government from other European pioneers. All of this has happened. We just have to look at it piece by piece. We can't collectivize the whole thing.
Yeah.
By the way, Kasimir, my name is Carlos Saldivia, and good to meet you.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you too.
Kaz has been a good friend of the show for a long time. And always honored to have him on. Yeah,
How did you guys initially meet?
Probably a panel would be my guess. We were probably on a panel.
Crucible.
Yeah, it probably was the Crucible.
Okay.
It's funny because ironically, we've probably, I don't know, at this point we've debated more on the same side, but we've certainly debated against each other, like on many issues. Even though we're probably in agreement on 95%, the 5% matters. That's what a lot of people don't understand as well. They assume that like any disagreement you have with someone means that you're like, have a hatred for them. It's not true at all. But yeah, it's amazing to me to see how people try to take sort of these principles and a lack of understanding of principles and be able to exploit it to have their own selective outcome and bigotry. And so when you go through sort of what I call cultural Marxism, there's probably more of a technical term for it, but this idea that we break everyone into categories of oppressors versus oppressed, and the oppressed is always the group that should be the foreseeable winner, because that is the most virtuous thing we could do, is to award the oppressed sort of the status of victory and access to land, resources, etc. It's just a thinly veiled attempt to say that there are preferential groups that they want to be bigoted against, whether that be bigotry against race, like so men or white people are the oppressed, minorities are the oppressed, or sex or sexual orientation, or any of these things. The inverse of what they're claiming is actually true. They constantly say that the oppressed group is acting in a bigoted way against the oppressed group. But what's really happening is it's an excuse to treat in a bigoted way those groups that they're calling oppressed. And it's an actual oppressors. It's actually a very clever trick, right? That they're able to completely invert language and be able to claim sort of this righteous high ground that's actually should be reserved for the very people that they're accusing.
But this is a very important point. It's not just their trick. It's the trick of every aggressor, almost every aggressor in human history. If we look at, there is a famous letter by Osama bin Laden, which is quoted by some anti-war types as, this explains why they did this thing to the United States. No. This is a very typical, post hoc justification of what you actually want to do. So you want to gain control over a territory. There's currently a foreign influence on it. You want to take that influence out. Now you create an excuse, which is the excuse that says something that I intend to do myself, the other tribe can't do. And so that's why I attack them. That's why I attack their military, but also just happen to directly target civilians and innocents and generate as much terror as I could for political pressure. That's the message there, the hidden message. But the open message is you've attacked us, therefore we're counterattacking by blowing up New York City. And it's the same message from point to any dictator. The Austrian man, the big bad Austrian man, wrote an entire book where his group is the chief victims of Europe, and it's time for the victims to take their rightful place, because they're actually not victim, they're superhuman, and they deserve to conquer everybody. Interestingly, if you read certain American literature from the left, from these minority groups, it's the same language. You could take his speeches, as James Lindsay did.
Yeah, I saw, yeah.
Change the names, and just inject them into academia, and they would be accepted because the arguments are the same. But if you go farther back in history, you see the same thing. You see people, claiming that they're victims. It's a very easy tactic to do, and it's really funny as you see not a documentary, with a TV series I saw, but the Turkish government produced. I think it was shown either on Netflix, on one of these networks, where the whole premise of the show is that they're conquering Constantinople from the Romans, and it's about the first conquest, Suleiman the Great or whatever, his main achievement, and yet in some sense they're presenting themselves as victims even in that conquest glorification movie.
Yeah.
They're victimized by Christendom. They have that city by divine right, even though they never possessed it before. They're coming in as latecomers, and it's glorified. It's part of their culture now. They massacred the Armenians. They genocide. Sorry, they destroyed a lot of Armenians in the past century. And I recently learned, I was trying to read up on that, they have a monument, not for the Armenian victims of their actions, but to the alleged Turkish victims that were allegedly attacked by some Armenians.
Yeah.
And the complete inversion of and the way this inversion works is they find one exceptional case, blow it out of proportion, and ignore 90% of what happened. That's the method of it, is to find the so-called Reichstag fire, right? You're attacking the other tribe, they're attacking the other tribe all throughout, but if there is a counterattack, if there's a massacre that goes the other way, that becomes the central cause. It's very, very mean, but very, very common.
It's very interesting because I think you could see this play out, like, even in a political sense in our society. So when you see, like, all of these would-be revolutionaries, and people correctly point out it's very surface level, but true, to look at this and go, how the hell could you be a revolutionary if every powerful institution in this country has your back? So if corporate America is sponsoring your revolution, and the majority political party sponsoring it, and the majority of the media and academia, if they're all sponsoring it and on board with your message, how could this be a revolution? And the irony is, they are playing this sort of oppressed card, this victimhood card, even the most powerful of these institutions that we see. And so then they need someone that's the oppressor. Who's it going to be? And I think it's hilarious to see who they come up with as the oppressors. Like the boogeyman that they're doing of like the stereotypical MAGA hat wearing Republican. And who are these people, like the caricature they're painting? Well, it's some guy that's a welder right? That's like got 3 kids and it's like, that's him. That's the fucking problem. That's the real power, right? That's what we're fighting against. And it's laughable because no matter how little informed you are, you just take 2 steps back and be like, wait a minute, let me get this straight. All of these powerful corporations, billionaires, politicians, people involved in all these institutions, they're the victims and they're fighting up against the mighty oppressor who is people that are living paycheck to paycheck in rural America. And it's like you start to look at this. You even see it like when we talk. I mean, look, I have no love for racism. I don't. I'm sure you feel the same way as me. But with the boogeymans they create with like the idea of like how nefarious the KKK is. The KKK couldn't be weaker in this country. Any remote association with them gets you laughed out of any polite institution. Like it's literally they have no institutional power whatsoever. That doesn't mean that you can't dislike them, despise them, or that individuals can't do dangerous actions at the individual level. But we constantly allow these institutions of power to play the oppressed card by pointing at institutions that literally are the opposite of, or groups that are the opposite of powerful, and claiming that they're this evil boogeyman that has all this power.
Yeah, they have more flags than they have members.
Yeah.
Well, we have a KKK that's active and extremely powerful that caused the U.S. government to release photos where they literally kneel in front of the new KKK flag. And if cross burnings are evil, then we've had city burnings. We've had church burnings all throughout Canada. We have church burnings all throughout Europe, for that matter. And it's all justified in a similar manner. Oh, it's the oppressed group. They are justified in their some kind of a retribution narrative. This is sort of a weird place to be for me, because I was raised to look at or at least when I spent some time in Israel, I believe that the British Empire was presented as something bad, as the oppressor. And in some sense they were in certain situations in history. But then you start thinking, let's compare them to any other oppressor. What exactly did they brought in? Yes, they exploited, they connected the world, and they benefited from being the central bank of everything, from being the printer of everything to some extent. But compare them to anyone else. Everybody else was a homogenizing swarm. If you got conquered by the Turks or the Arabs, you became Turkic and Arabic over time. If you look at any of these empires, their number of minorities over 100 years, the last 100 years of progress, Christendom has disappeared from the Levant, wiped clean. Lebanon is like one tiny remnant that, due to all the violence coming from a certain group, certain peaceful religion, has wiped out the Christians there, down from over 50% to just over 20, I believe. That is huge. But we're not allowed to talk about that. And yet, if you look at the British Empire, all the minority groups and all the local groups have an inflection point when they get conquered by the British. There is a reason, I believe, why in India, for example, if you look at the history of the conquest of India, massive numbers of irregulars in the British Army are local troops. Well, how does that work if they're colonizers? It's very simple. They pay their bills on time with real currency, and their operating costs as a government, as a state, as evil as that is, are much smaller than what was there before. The Mamluks were also foreign invaders, the leaders of India at the time. They were being replaced by other foreigners who were just much more benevolent. And that's why there was a very rapid conquest of that entire country. Because the people on the ground, they saw improvement. They saw interconnectivity. They saw an ability to...
Should be coming back on live now. It says it.
So some people in the chat were asking who Kasimir was.
Oh, well, wait. We'll allow him to explain himself here. Let's give a second for this to get back on. Okay, we're back. People in the chat were asking Kasimir, who are you? What a metaphysical question.
Who are you?
Who is Kasimir?
So let's see. I wanna see if chat is running. Oh, we're back. Okay, we are back. Let me reload this. To watching. What is this? What is this?
Well, I
Oh,
think what happens probably in YouTube, it probably ended the video. Now you have to restart another one. And Twitch, who
hope,
the hell knows that?
hopefully people will.
By the way, before you answer this question, just as a brief aside, did you see the shit that Twitch is doing with their political streaming? Now you have to label yourself like politically sensitive content, and it's gonna
No,
have.
I haven't seen what they're. Well, they're defending against that allegation. So what are how are they covering for Hassan? Tell me.
Dude, last night I literally did a stream. It's like 20 minutes. It was like, hey, 24-hour stream tomorrow. Everyone join. We're going to have congressmen on, blah, blah, blah. I think there was like one political question someone asked me. It's super benign. And the stream, no problem. I just lay down to go to bed, try to get some sleep. I get an email. I check Gmail. It's like, I just got a warning on Twitch for politically sensitive content. And it's basically my understanding of the rules are, you talked politics, that's politically sensitive. And so you have to go through and label your channel as politically sensitive. And then I would assume that inevitably what happens with that is the algorithm's manipulated to deprioritize sort of content that's it's like adult only or something. It's like, so, I could be a titty streamer in the hot tub and Twitch is like, all good, man. They've put up with years of Hassan and that crew. But my goodness, someone like me with hot political takes as such as, hey, maybe we should try to secure a border and have cheap groceries. Too much. That's too much, to be able to. It's so ridiculous. I hate Twitch, but I'll stick it out.
A trigger warning, huh?
Yeah.
So, all right. So the question was, we got people on here now. The question people wanted to know is, who is Kasimir? So you want to tell them just a little about yourself? I falsely assumed maybe most of the people would have been from the Crucible or my channel would have known you, but I guess there's probably some that don't.
Sure. I think the fastest identification is I'm the only real libertarian, maybe an objectivist libertarian in some sense. Debate bro. Guest. I show up to streams to say based things, to exploit other people's platforms because I work hard and I'm lazy when I don't. And so for now, that's it. I'm interested in questions of law, of jurism from the libertarian perspective. I read a lot of books about that. I'm interested in history, but in general, I'm sort of a jack of all trades in terms of political conversations. I can weave a whole bunch of things, maybe too much. And I like analytics, integrating different concepts. And the story of how I came here is I was just like a normal gamer, teenager, I guess maybe early 20s. And somebody brought up that there's a thing called Discord and brought me into a channel that was political. I think it was around, actually it was much later. Initially, it was just all games and communities. But then around the election of Trump, the sort of Trump conservatives have had their own Discord. And when I showed up there, they would bring in debaters, people like Dark Dawkins, and I would watch them just like, crush the atheists. At some point, Dawkins lured me into debating him, and I sort of received a little bit of a smackdown because I was like a normie, sort of don't care default atheist at the time. And but I have a fighting spirit, so the very next day, I came back and I decided like a plan of action, and I debated him into muting me because I realized it wasn't like a good debate tactic. It was very dishonest, but I managed to what I believed to be like a victory, which is he couldn't continue talking to me because of the positions I took. I broke through his little scheme that he runs on people. And I love that. I loved the sort of this idea that somebody could get so annoyed. Somebody was like dominating me the day before and like making me feel bad about my opinions, and can suddenly act like a whiny little girl and block me. And so I was like, this is interesting. Then I joined groups that were doing debates. First as like a researcher. My friend established a server where there were debate teams, and I randomly picked one of the teams, and I started helping the people there who were more experienced debaters at the time prepare their arguments. So one of the preparations was to research moral realism, and I really dove into that. And that started affecting my own personal beliefs. I started realizing, oh, there's lots of interesting stuff to read, and I don't have to have, weak, groundless sort of classic liberal light opinions anymore. And I can look into trying to reconcile what contradictions exist in like my conservative view. I always, by the way, realize those contradictions because when you come from Russia, it's very weird. In Russia, the right are the liberals and the left are the communists. But the right are liberals here are like, when you come over here, they're like they're not considered the conservative. The conservative are the communists. And so I thought, oh, maybe there was some kind of a flip. I just couldn't orient myself here. I defaulted to listening to Democrats initially, but they were saying things that were already starting to sound anti-classically liberal, even, back 20 years ago. Right. And so I was just confused. That confusion only got resolved, finally, when I started reading libertarian books, some stuff by Rothbard, Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, stuff like that, and a bunch of articles on Mises.org when I got to that website. And also in debate groups, you eventually end up, you want to have strong arguments. You're geared towards that, like driven, you want to win debates. And I noticed that initially the libertarian and anarchists were easy food. But when I read the books that they were supposed to be reading, I realized, oh, the books are actually very strong. And they matched my mentality because when somebody like Hans Hermann Hoppe writes, he's like, here's, a Tetris piece. Here's another Tetris piece. Here's how they connect. It's all like solid, step after step. He's building up. It didn't seem unclear. It's not vague. And it answers questions better than everything else I've read so far. And it contains a lot of the things that I now realize he's influenced by proper analysis of politics, of how politics actually works. And so now my current position is I call myself a real libertarian because no one else, very few people that I know within that circle do as much reading and thinking. And so we don't have anyone that represents us in public that we could point to from the current stars of libertarianism that are true. Dave Smith, you can call him out. He released another video recently where he says, I don't care about principles, I just want to be pragmatic. Failure. Like absolute failure. Which means that he can be pushed around and submitted, just like Andrew Wilson did when they talked.
Yeah, the same guy, right?
Yeah, it's the same guy. He folded. Now, he folded not because there aren't strong arguments in his favor. He folded from the lightest pressure because he doesn't read the theory. Yeah, it's like, imagine, here's an analogy that the chat will understand. Imagine if somebody didn't go beyond catechumen in Christianity and tries to argue theology. Mm-hmm. They didn't complete, they actually flunked out. They didn't finish reading the Bible. How can they argue what the Bible says?
Well, listen, right. I like Dave. I think he's a likable guy. I think a lot of his gut is going in the right direction, what I see. But if you don't have a good philosophical underpinning for understanding your worldview, it's a difficult premise to then go in and debate that. And I understand Dave feels like, well, I didn't understand that this was a debate is going to be his argument, which is fine. But I was struck by, and again, I say this as someone who likes Dave. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not denigrating him as a person, but I was struck. It just not understanding even the most basic of concepts or criticism, like just literally the most surface level. Okay, well, where do you derive your system of morality? And That's like one of the most obvious questions you're going to get, right? Like,
Where is
and,
the system of law coming from? And he just had to say default, like not even convincingly to say from God, but like an excuse when you fall the debate.
and especially when your opponent is arguing for sort of a Christian populist worldview, right? So they're definitely going to be ready to argue with you on the concept of like, well, what do you mean it comes from God? Explain to me what you mean by that. And it was sort of like, well, I don't really want to debate this, is how it came across. Like, I don't want to talk about this. I just thought that I was going to talk about, like, we need
State
less
bad.
taxes. Yeah, well, that's
Taxes
it.
bad.
Lower
But
taxes.
part of that is the way I think that he was concussed by the way that Andrew came at him. I mean, Andrew came at him like
maybe a little too hot.
It was an MMA fight. I mean, right? I mean, it was.
Listen,
it was a cage match.
He's the number one guy in our movement.
Huh?
I expect him to be an MMA fighter.
Right,
what
Dave.
does it mean?
And he wasn't. Clearly he wasn't.
Right.
But I think that it took him back. Andrew came at him like, I mean, the whistle didn't even blow, and Andrew was like, stomping his feet. And
listen, stylistically, I can understand why. Like, let's say it's not Dave Smith. Let's just say it's like some high schooler that's like, hey, I have a foray. And like you were saying at the beginning, Kasimir, you're just taking a foray into sort of libertarian principles. And all of a sudden you're in this, you thought it was a discussion, you're in this debate. And this dude's coming, like, yeah, Andrew's too much of a dick then. But that's not the case. I think Andrew's treating Dave with sort of the respect of, oh, you're supposed to be someone who's sort of an ideological mover, in this circle. And so I'm interested to push back on you. And, I couldn't help but, and again, I'm not saying this to shit on Dave, but especially when I saw you call in, right? And you're trying to make a point in Dave's favor, and he doesn't even understand that, right? Like when you call in and you're outlining, I can't remember specifically what the scenario was.
I made some mistakes there. I made it too complicated. I tried to use an analogy without polishing it until it like flows naturally and people understand it. So it was very rough initially. But yes, there was a moment where he could have understood and he just flat out refused. Now, I can tell you exactly why. Several months ago, there is a post where he talks about, the question of borders, or the question they keep talking about the bomb in the park and the other, philosophical questions, where there's writing for him to refer to. There is like almost 2 decades or 3 decades of arguments where Rothbard wrote his original article in favor of police evicting the bomb 30 years ago, and that caused a major rift and a lot of analysis. He didn't read any of that. And when somebody approached him and said, let's discuss this, let's talk about this openly, let's debate this or have a friendly explainer of this, he said, I don't need to. So he's not a participant.
Right. And
that means that here's another thing.
Why though? Why would he say that?
And another just last factoid. When he spoke to Andrew and he referenced some book and some writer, wasn't a libertarian ANCAP hardcore writer, wasn't even a quasi-libertarian writer, it was just some paleocon that he happens to like. And the answer is that libertarianism is a grift. It is very appealing to a certain libertine type of young person. And that was most of the stuff what he was doing. He noticed that when he walks out into like a comedy show, there's this type of person in the crowd who's young, millennial, employed in some productive work, maybe factory, maybe IT, people that do things, right? Not the social workers. Their body is covered with tattoos, right? They're wearing, cool hipster gear. They're drinking, the hipster beer. They're smoking a vape. And they don't want the government to take part of their paycheck away. Their morals, however, very shaky, right? Their traditional foundations, very shaky. They're very open to exploitation by various nefarious agents. But it just happened to be that they want to be left alone, man. And on top of that, there are disaffected Republicans ex-cops that know the system inside out, ex-Marines, and all of those who like this type of rowdy humor that and sort of anti-woke, but really humor that goes against the sacred cows in society. We just happen to be woke right now, but could have been Christianity 20 years ago. And he's riding that wave of popularity among those people. But that wave of popularity doesn't require any intellectual integrity. It doesn't require reading the people he quotes, like sometimes name drops. Or maybe he read them 15 years ago, but if you don't practice it, if you don't, do like Rob, where you show up to debate, then your iron grows soft, if it even exists, right? And you start losing to the first opponent that just pressures you a tiny bit.
Well, and I think that there is one of the beauties of like actual libertarian philosophy is, well, this isn't a beauty. It appears very easy at the outset, right? So it appears easy in this sense. You just say, well, there's one answer, right? Like state no, right? Should the government? No. My answer is no. That's it. It's holistic, easy to do. The problem is when someone starts to say, but why? Like, let's look at what does no mean? Like, what do you do in these situations where it's conflicting? Where are your moral underpinnings? Where's that you came to the conclusion of no? Where does that exist? And so many people, even myself to an extent, I'll admit this, I've always considered myself like libertarian adjacent, but never a full libertarian for this very reason, because in order to articulate these positions, you have to have a very nuanced understanding of exactly what's going on. Because as soon as someone presses you as like, where do these values come from? It's not so simple anymore. And so people mistakenly think like this is an easy position to advocate for because it's a simple answer. Everything I can answer any possibility. Should we raise the tax rate on this? Of course not. Should we increase the police force here? Nope. Should we enforce border laws? Nope. Nope. And so many of what you see in the modern libertarian movement just takes it to that surface level. And when you start to be like, but wait a minute, like look at how your sort of idea of why the state shouldn't act in these sort of examples, how that's contradictory to a lot of the other principles that you would think would apply to sort of a non-aggression principle. And they just, as soon as you get there, it's just like, well, fuck the principles. Like, well, fuck all that. Like, all I'm saying is I want to smoke weed. Right? Like, and it's like at that level, it's sort of collapsed. And again, let me be clear. I have no problem if that's you out there, right? You're just some dude and that's it. And not everyone has to be a deep philosophical thinker that you're reading literature over. Maybe you're working 9 to 5, cool in the gang. But if you're going to be the de facto leader of a movement, like now it becomes problematic because if there's people out there that sort of are under the umbrella that by hook or crook you claim to represent, now it's doing them a huge disservice if you don't even know the bare minimum. And I think I could sense your frustration, Kaz, when you're calling in, where it's like, holy shit, if this is the metric which people look at true libertarianism versus something like a Christian populism, it's bad news for you all. Because anyone objectively that comes out of that debate looking's like, what the fuck is this? Like, this guy...
Imagine you're an Orthodox Christian or a Christian period, and there's a guy who represents you who shows up, right? But as soon as he starts talking, the rainbow flags come out, right? And he's actually a female priest, and you're like, no, that's not what Christianity is about. And that's how we were feeling. But this is not new. Even the Rothbard at the time, who was the originator of much of this thought, who was the first person who sort of raised many of the questions, didn't really answer them. He wrote an article called "Natural Outlaws Have the Duty to Shut Up." And he was addressing those types of people. He was addressing various Stirnerites who believe that no law is possible. So if no law is possible, shut up. You don't need to comment. If you're a nihilist, shut up about moral issues. If you're an outlaw, don't talk about the law. If you just want freedom, man, then don't participate in politics, period. We don't want to listen to you. We will liberate you as baggage. Right. We'll carry you over the threshold, which you can't represent. You can't talk. Stay quiet. But really, the message should be get out. It is impossible. And now, the problem is it's all very young. Some of the books that Dave Smith has to read are much younger than him. They're like 10 years old, 15 years old, 5 years old. If you pull up Property and Punishment and Proportionality by Stephen Kinsella, that's a guy who's alive right now. He released that book maybe less than 10 years ago. You should have him on your podcast or show at some point. He's a great thinker. He's an IP lawyer who
What's his name?
Retired. Stephen Kinsella.
Okay.
I'll link you his.
Yeah, send me. I'd love to talk to him. Yeah.
He's a. I don't know if he has the. I hope he has the time, but he's a brilliant mind. But Dave Smith doesn't read him. There's like Tom Woods that Dave Smith reads, but Tom Woods is more geared towards the podcast. He's not really as much of a jurist. He's more like economics. So on economics, most of the things that Dave understands is correct. Like Austrian economics, reduced state involvement, everything will be fine, which is the truth most of the time.
Right.
So the issue with our entire philosophy is it's very young, and we have to fight infiltration attempts that are geared towards much stronger movements. Like this, imagine the people who are trying to infiltrate, like the neocons, infiltrated and conquered the GOP. The neocons are absolutely alien in terms of philosophy to even classical conservatives like Buckley.
Right.
They just took over the GOP like a puppet, like a monster inside a puppet. And imagine something that much money, that much power, also seeking to subvert libertarianism. You have that. It's called Reason TV. It's called the Cato Institute. There is a recent debate. Here's an example your audience will like. I watched a Soho debate between a New York Times economist, forgot his name, and a Cato economist. The argument was, is it true that Americans today have worse economic prospects than 20 years ago? And the Cato economist was arguing no, that in fact, everything is better for the common man today than 20 years ago. And the New York Times columnist was arguing against that. He was arguing actually the populist position, which is the same thing that Donald Trump is saying, that everything is sort of going down the drain, and that people's perception of their reality is that they're being impoverished. So how did they both argue? Well, they introduced this concept called the takings. So for example, I earn a certain amount of money per year, but I benefit from government assistance, let's say rent control or some other, the roads or whatever. And so the economist calculates that money is given back to me by the government, right? The maintenance of society, they apply that to my balance as like a plus, as what the government gives me. And they calculate the total money I have, including the welfare that I receive just by existing from the government, right? And then they look, there are these high bracket taxpayers, government employees, feds, judges, CEOs of government-connected corporations, and they look at their salary that they pay a lot of taxes, and those taxes go from that upper class, and they go down to me, and they help me pay my bills. And so therefore, I'm actually better off than 20 years ago. And so he calls that welfare. But here's the problem. This is what's missing. Two things are missing. First of all, who says that this government official, who's probably some kind of a regulator, is not a welfare recipient himself?
Correct.
His entire position, his, I don't know, $100,000 per year plus job, is a welfare job. All he does is he regulates the economy, meaning he prevents people from doing their job. He is like in the way. He's requiring licenses he's collecting payments. He's requiring licenses. He's like his entire position is a welfare position. So the takings should be considered his entire amount of earnings should be taken in the other direction.
Correct.
I mean, extraction. They're ignoring the extraction from the economy by all of these. Can I use the word that starts with a P
Sure.
and ends with a site, right?
Yeah.
The parasites. And it's not just, government officials. Also, you give a contract, you spend any money. Amazon receives money from the government to host their servers. So is that guy in Amazon, is he not on welfare?
Right.
For the NSA to spy on all of us, that those servers, why should they be considered part of the GDP of the productive society? What's productive about spying on everybody?
It's so interesting. Like, and you could look how this plays out even in real time news that you're seeing. So the job reports just came out, and people are like, "Oh, 12,000, what a terrible miss." But then you delve a little deeper, and in fact, if you look a little deeper at the jobs number in general for the past 2 years, it is amazing what portion of the jobs created are government jobs. So one of the questions that I had, and I thought it'd be interesting to ask you this. Clearly, there's a problem with that, anyways, and you're right. That is a form of taking out of sort of that is a form of welfare. But what do you do in a system like ours that allegedly is sort of some form of representative democracy if 51% of the people are reliant on government jobs? How do you ever vote yourself out of that system where those people are going to be like, well, we're going to constantly vote for the expansion of the government because our livelihoods are basically based on this welfare? Obviously, there's different forms of welfare, but the purest form that I'm talking about here is every single person that gets one of those government jobs isn't going to want to vote for a party that says, holy shit, we need to cut back the size of government.
Yeah, that's my argument. You don't. You're not peacefully, most likely. But Hans Hermann Hoppe, who wrote Democracy, the God That Failed, who in every lecture makes that very argument, that the system by design expands its own power, and it's purely budget expansion oriented. Meaning, and this is if you ever worked with government or in a quasi-government field, you know that the way they work is you have to, if they allocate a budget, you have to spend it, and you have to, in fact, expand it by 10% every year. It becomes unsustainable very, very fast. This is just the nature of the beast. This is what it produces. Look at the results. The results are it produces useless positions, don't do anything, and keeps expanding until it will choke its host. The answer to that, the only peaceful answer we have, outside of open resistance, is nullification. Meaning, you move to states that nullify most federal government stuff, and you find an occupation and employment in a field that's disconnected from all of this, and you hope that your survival rations and bullets, and more importantly, allies and friends, will carry you through the reckoning that will happen over the next 100 years, you or your family.
Do you think that there is a potential for another solution that's obviously, I'll admit, would be a long shot, but that of incrementalism? So, for example, if we look at the problems of illegal immigration, one of the arguments we're told is it's politically untenable because to take 35 million people and ship them out, we don't have the bureaucracy for it, the infrastructure for it. But what if you just take the 1% of the worst of them, and then you take the next 1%? Similarly, you shrink the size of government by 10% now, and those 10% that will raise their voices, the other 90% don't have the foresight to see we're coming for your shit eventually. So you could potentially win political battles now with that 90% not necessarily thinking. Is that a possibility? And has it ever happened?
Javier Milei in Argentina is showing us that it's indeed possible, which is the most shocking thing that happened in our lifetimes politically, possibly after Trump's election.
Yeah.
Which is Milei was elected.
He's a libertarian, right?
It's really funny. He is a libertarian, in fact, probably an ANCAP, but he's also an actual pragmatic sort of politician. And so what he's attempting incrementalism. He's getting huge amount of heat even from Hoppe himself, who more or less called him like a traitor to the cause. But which is I believe Hoppe is getting a bit
curmudgeon-y?
a bit cranky in his old age, I would say, but not even that. I think he's He's trying to remain the purest. It may be that Milei will be a betrayer, and the whole thing will fail, of course. But the attempt is producing results. He is reducing government. And in terms of voting, defensively voting, somebody like Milei for the United States would be amazing. Cut the government 10%, cut the government 20%. There's a lot of people that don't do anything. We even have empirics that show that. There was an investigation how members of the Democratic Socialists of America on government jobs spent their time and were caught just engaging in political activism online. Meaning they're supposed to work to do something, to enact all of those regulations and bad things in society, but they don't even do that, which is possibly good. Instead, they do their own political work on your dime. They're acting as a call center inside some government agency, calling for a political candidate to get the votes out before an election. That's what those people really are doing while they're in office.
I mean, if you had to guess, this is unfair to ask it.
No, incrementalism is possible, basically. Yes.
It's so unfair to ask this, but just take a ballpark guess. How many people of our workforce or of working age population in the United States do you think are of net benefit, that are putting in to benefit the country versus people like at government jobs or other jobs that are sort of shifting around, smoke and mirrors? It seems that the pool of people that are actually contributing shrinks more and more every year. And it's scary to think about how everyone else is relying on the backs of what seems to be an increasingly smaller minority.
No, I don't think it's a small minority. I was going to say Pareto distribution, but really I shouldn't. In terms of there are some jobs, some fields like IT, coders, inventors, intellectual jobs, where the Pareto distribution is naked, meaning almost 1-to-1. So there's a single coder in the United States that probably does 90% of the stuff that's high-end that gets produced, and everything else is a copy of a copy of a copy. And in every corporation, in every company, there's the same IT department will have 1 or 2 individuals doing 60 to 80% of the workload that's effective. But I also know that I constantly encounter the people who keep society working. Everybody from the garbage collectors to the people that perform municipal work, even if it's for the government, that maintain all the power stations and everything else, that build the homes, that repair the damage, and those people are working honest jobs. It's 9 to 5. They and if they didn't, our society would collapse very, very rapidly. But it doesn't. We have a huge amount of momentum. The United States is greatly underappreciated, and in fact, I believe that's why this sort of parasitic slavers class at the top of the government and of the state, why they're so brazen about it, because they recognize how much more there is to take until this breaks. Now, that's not a good attitude. It's not a good attitude to test the system until it's breaking. But they see that in order to reach Venezuela levels of poverty, it will probably take 100 more years of grinding. Plenty enough for each one of them to benefit personally, to have a personal, wonderful life, to build a personal dynasty for themselves and their children. That's what they're counting on. So I hope Americans wake up earlier to that.
Yeah, so do we. My question is, could you describe what the central tenets or precepts of libertarianism are?
Yes. So when we started this conversation, I outlined the position on ownership. First comer, late comer dichotomy. That's actually the absolute center core. And it goes from the way we validate the existence of truth, that follows into laws of logic, and into this idea that if ownership exists, it must be only of this type because everything else is negated. And then from there, we can call, we can sort of identify and then solve the problem of law, which is what it is. We're humans. The central concept of libertarianism is human action, that humans are rational, meaning not that they make perfect decisions, but they're trying to make informed decisions some of the time at least. And they see the world as imperfect, of something that they constantly don't like, and they constantly want to improve it for themselves and their family members. That requires human action. And this human action has to be based on some evaluation of what's in front of you and what you can do. Now, two humans could see the same stick, and one of them sees like a stick to start a fire with, and the other one sees a fishing rod. And when they both reach for it, or one of them has it and the other one wants to take it, we call that a conflict, meaning it's a contradictory use of the same means to achieve something. The problem of law in our conception is, how do we resolve that conflict? And we identify philosophically three solutions. One of them is the law of the jungle. I take the stick and make it a fishing rod, and if you approach me afterwards, I punch you. Very simple. The other one is mixed law, is we establish the United States and a constitution, and then we all vote together. That's mixed law, because the person who loses the vote basically gets to lose. They don't get to say what happens to the stick. Mixed law. And then there is what we call rational or objective law, or used to be called natural law, because we observe it from nature, which is we reject the initiation of conflicts as a solution to them. We say you do not initiate conflicts. There's two ways to read that. Descriptively, meaning it is the case that somebody who initiates a conflict can be called a criminal, and somebody who does not is not. Or there are some libertarians like my friend Liquid Zulu who make an even bigger claim. They say you ought not initiate conflicts. Now that creates a whole moral category, like moral division between all possible actions, where the initiation of conflict defaults to immorality. Like there could be other analysis of your action that makes you as a Christian claim that it's immoral, but there's a baseline other claim that if whatever you're doing initiates a conflict, it cannot be moral by definition. I'll give you an example. If you steal from somebody and you claim, I'm stealing the food to feed the poor, that action cannot be moral, even though feeding the poor is like a moral Christian thing to do. You cannot redistribute wealth that way, like honestly gained wealth we're talking about, right? You cannot take from an honest farmer to feed the poor. You can ask for a donation, you can require charity, require as in by social pressure. But if you steal it, then something else happens.
Right.
And so that's the core tenet. And what it means is that even if we take the question of law as like an ought, we ought not aggress, we ought maintain the non-aggression principle, it is still just a legal theory that is very incomplete. We admit to that, which is why most consistent libertarians are libertarian dash something, mostly libertarian Christians. Tom Woods, if I'm not mistaken, possibly. Robert Murphy, a writer who wrote Chaos Theory, he's a Christian. The people like Stephen Kinsella is an atheist, but he recently said things like that he understands he exists within Christian Western morality as the concepts that he works with. liquids.
So I'll give you an example.
ahead.
If you went to a bar and they checked you at the door and they asked for your identification, and you're a very handsome man, but I know you're over 21. Okay? In real life, right? You're over 21. The judgment required is a minimum base. You know, hey, that guy looks over 21, and that guy certainly does not look over 21. Regardless, they ask for your identification because they want to scan your ID into the computer. Do you do it?
Yes, and let's analyze why. I'm assuming, because I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary, that the bar owner is a legitimate owner of that bar, and upon entry to his premises, I have to comply with his set of rules. And in fact, in the society that I want to envision, the entire city that I live in, the entire community, would operate as that bar. Meaning, if I choose to remain there, there's going to be a set of rules established by somebody who legitimately owns that territory. It could be a person on behalf of a group where they have some contract that controls that person's decisions. Or it could be just an individual, an Elon Musk type that just happens to acquire his town. And when I enter there, they say, these are the rules. These are the social moral codes that you have to follow. And there are two layers there. If they ask me to do something that is baseline libertarian criminal, then I don't have to comply. For example, they can't tell me, in order to enter this bar, you have to rob somebody. Like, that would be a violation of the baseline. They would say you have to initiate aggression. I'm outside in the Venn diagram of rules. I'm outside of permissible actions. I can refuse. But if they say, display your identity, well, I would be the one who initiates a conflict if I refuse and still try to enter. I can refuse and leave. Right?
Right.
And that's because they determine the moral code, meaning the thing that sets above the law within their territory, and their quote unquote local rules, local guidelines, is that everybody identifies themselves. Everybody, puts the firearm in the safe, which was a Wild West thing from time to time.
Well, let me ask you this. I think this may be getting to what you're saying, Carlos. What if same situation applies, but there's some duplicitous meaning behind them scanning your ID? That guy's going to take your information and then sell it against your will to are they engaging in conflict? Is that what they've done? They've engaged in conflict?
No, well, so what if the owner, Kasimir, doesn't want to create a firewall to require an ID, but it's the government because that bar had problems with underage drinking, so they made them check everybody's ID. But the step that I'm really interested is not the asking of the ID. It's taking the ID and scanning it into a computer. That's where you lose me, because I don't know where that's going. I don't know why it's going there. I don't know anything about how it's being kept safe or if it's being sold, like Robert, just brought up. It's a tricky, I love the example because I ask politicians all the time, what do you think of this idea? And in real life, there's a store. Where are you geographically? Are you in San Francisco?
No. This is just for fun. Okay. Works well as a background because I have a white wall behind me. I'm in New York City right now. I'm in the state from New York.
So in Pennsylvania, we have a store called Wegmans, which is a kind of like a high-end supermarket. And they opened up beer and wine sales. You cannot buy anything unless you let them scan your driver's license into their computer. Let's not even get into the fact that the state of Pennsylvania is letting Wegmans interface with their private database of people who own driver's licenses. Let's not go there, okay? But where does that information go? Is it fair to ask, or is it fair to say that it's extremely unfair for you to take my ID and put it in a computer to go someplace where I don't know, where you're storing it, you might be selling it, you might be hacked, it can be taken. Is there a libertarian issue there for you?
No, on baseline, I'll explain why. Libertarianism, in terms of the feeling, the emotion of it, is a little bit discomfort. In order to be comfortable as a libertarian, like for you to be personally comfortable in your society, you have to take proactive measures, meaning you have to take Rob and Andrew and everybody else. You have to move, let's say, to New Hampshire, where there's a libertarian project, and you have to establish such a community where there will be an actual free market, where there's going to be no restriction on who can sell booze, where the society will decide like the age of consent, whatever it is, and for now, scientifically, let's keep it at 21 or whatever. And then if this store asks to scan for your ID, there's going to be a competing other store, hopefully gets established. If it doesn't, well, you're sort of screwed. But the feeling of discomfort from being screwed by reality is something that that's something you should get used to, because that's what's you can't like externalize this. That's the mistake. You can't, for example, go to your state representative and say, let's force companies to not take ID. Because now you've taken this agency that you and your community should have, and you're giving it to somebody in some state capital, and they will take that agency and they will do what you want initially because they want your votes. But it gives them the lever of power over you. So my answer is that if something is uncomfortable in society and I want to solve it, I should prioritize or the allowable moves are non-aggressive ones, meaning establish competition, meaning become closer to how the Amish behave, for example. So if there's an Amish church in the region and you open up a store and you ask all the Amish to, I don't know, scan their ID or strip naked before walking in, what they should do is they should say, anyone who wants to keep attending our church is going to ostracize that guy. His business will be driven to zero. We will not comply as a community. And they will have that will non-aggressively, without involving the state power, without giving power to anyone else, solve the problem. It'll keep power in our church, in our community. That's the solution to that. The solution is voluntary groups that combine their power together, not removing power from yourself and giving it to some bureaucrat far away. Because, as I said, initially, you might even get what you want, but you've just legitimized the idea that they're going to decide who does what in the market and how. That's the
right.
The
No,
problem
that makes
I have.
sense. Yeah.
Now, the discomfort is like real. I experience it all the time. Like, should I support the police? Well, when the police beat up a criminal, I'm very happy. I can watch a video of criminals getting shot all day with glee, right? No, not very Christian, but
What's the name of the guy on X? Emin? I am. MAN, and he does videos of people getting beat down. And
I recently I reposted one of his posts. I just discovered him, the guy with the MMA broadcaster who says, amazing
that's right.
guy.
Yeah.
Amazing
He's
guy.
amazing.
Yes.
He's amazing.
Now, I'm enjoying this, but I understand that there's going to be potentially some video in the future where if I say the wrong thing, like I constantly have to watch my speech, even though my speech is not dangerous. It's not giving an instruction to anyone to do anything. But if I say the wrong thing, the same cop will show up to my home, and if I offer any resistance, there will be a video of me getting beat up. And the cop will be like, oh, it's just Tuesday. It's just Monday.
Right.
Everything's fine. They will come. And I saw that, listen, the thing that sort of radicalized me, I already knew that the cops were suspect. But I'll be able to sit on stream in front of a cop and say all cops are bastards unironically. Why? Because you have survived in your job, let's say in a liberal city at least, right? Not a sheriff in some small town. But in a liberal city, if you're a cop in New York or in any of those places that enforced COVID restrictions, I know that you're an oath breaker. Because I saw the business owner, the bar owner, on their knees begging to have their livelihood preserved. Saying,
and you did nothing. Yeah.
And they did nothing. They were in Staten Island, which is like a red district, a hard red district in New York. It absolutely glows red on the map. Everybody votes they're Republican. There were New York City Police Department cops in front of a bar working to close it, with 1,000 people surrounding them in the street. And those cops, if they were honest people, they had to say, I resign. I'm refusing to comply with this order. People are not yet brave enough to do that, because then they lose their pension and everything else. But if this is happening to them, I lose my respect to them because
right. Why should you trust them?
Yeah. So
right.
We got like 15 more minutes. If you
I wanted to let you know that Don McClure just texted me. He's up.
Oh, he's okay. So he was. Okay, that's fine. So he'll call in about 7:30. I have one more ridiculous hypothetical for you. Right. This is a very ridiculous one, but sort of to get to the root of this. Let's assume for a second. And I know this is impossible to have occurred, but let's assume that there's some sort of biological contagion. That the very nature of it is, if it incubates in even one person, it would knowingly lead to the death of the entire world. Do you have the right to force every single person that would come in contact with that to be inoculated in some way?
So my answer would be, at the baseline, no. However, this is every time you ask a libertarian a question, you should notice a pattern when we're asked hard questions where we have to like give up and say, oh no, humanity should die then. Which is, I think I should call it like the not preparing for winter analogy. Here's an example of it. What if there are two people and they're both naked and it's like freezing temperatures, they're in the woods, and the only way for you to survive is to attack your fellow human, and wrap them in yourself
right.
to escape from the cold? Would you do it? And, the pragmatic answer is, oh, yes, of course. I'll do it 100 times, right? But the libertarian answer is, why are you in the forest naked?
Yeah.
I love it.
Why?
I love it.
Maybe that is the issue. Why in your society is there no law already on the books that you've signed up to, that you agree to, that says, in this case, we get inoculated, everybody? And if you don't sign to this law, the church believes that you're not Christian enough, and the community believes that you violated the contract. Even by not signing up to it, please leave. You're ostracized. Maybe we will trade with you, maybe not. It's up to us. That should be one of the things as soon as a new threat gets introduced, church leaders, the community should come in and say, this should become part of our covenant. That's a very risky thing to do. It can destroy a society if you decide wrongly, like which was decided with the last pandemic, because it was just a slightly more threatening cough.
Right.
So
It's interesting. The principle
that's the answer.
The principle behind it's interesting because clearly that's an absurd distinction. But the argument that people are going to make is something akin to this: well, drunk driving should be illegal. Because even though you should have the right to imbibe whatever you want as an adult, as long as you know the risks and they've been outlined to you, and you should have the right to take that risk to get in your own vehicle as long as you're not a danger to someone else. But until you physically harm someone else, does someone have the right to tell you that just because the odds have increased that you'll harm someone else, you still haven't? So do we have the right as society to say you can't do that? Right? And so it gets to sort of this broader conversation of, is there, if we can say that there's a utilitarian reason that's absolutely predictable for a greater good, are we allowed to act with aggression in limited senses? And so the insane extreme of that would be sort of the scenario you outlined or I outlined, where you say, like, it would literally lead to the death of yourself or the death of all society if this doesn't occur. How do you evaluate that?
Libertarians have a test for libertarianism that's called the flagpole question. You fell off from your balcony, and you're falling down, and you catch a flagpole. You're hanging by the flagpole, and above you a window opens. There's no stairs. There's no way to get out of the situation. There's no phone call. There's nothing. And the guy says, "That's my flagpole. Let go." A true libertarian is to say, after I finish begging, I have to let go. That's the test. That you believe that even though the action of that person is immoral, doesn't give you the right to start climbing and fighting them to the death. And you don't, other people's property is not or their bodies or their efforts in life are not yours for the taking. Now, the society you should live in is your neighbors should be so good, and there maybe should be a contract written that if you do fall from the balcony and you do grab onto their flagpole, they let you climb up. And the society should be such that if there's no contract and they don't let you, then they wither and die away because everybody will ostracize them. And the threat of that should keep them from giving you that awful choice. But if you get the awful choice, you have to let go.
So let me ask you that. Let me see if I would be articulating this in a way that you think is at least close to what you're suggesting. From the perspective of the man there that's saying, "That's my flagpole," he wouldn't have engaged in an immoral action when it comes to baseline libertarian, in that he hasn't initiated a conflict because it is his property and he has the right to do with his property as he sees fit. But as you've already admitted, that oftentimes you are a libertarian / something, that there are holes, so there needs to be a greater sense of morality. If you were such as a libertarian / Christian, then you have acted immorally because you violated the Christian principle of sort of helping your neighbor and, engaging in ethically. So the baseline libertarian principle, it wouldn't be immoral. But the addition to it that you would say we should live within that code through a Christian sense of morality, it could be immoral from that Christianity sense.
Yes, and then if the interesting part is your neighbors can turn your entire life into a flagpole and tell you to let go. You can show up to a shop the next morning and it will say, "I'm not selling you food, get out." And there's no violation in that. You always live in the threat that if you become so antisocial that you're toxic, you're driven out of the society. And there's no big daddy, there's no big nanny to show up and say, "Oh, it's interstate commerce, you must open your shop to everybody who shows up." No, there's discrimination. You would have to find some other place to live, which is the reality. We see it on the ground when the Amish are implementing it. So that means it's possible to implement even with minimal access to actual force.
I don't know about Rob, but listen, one of my closest friends is a libertarian. Serious. I mean, but the knock, and I don't know if you've heard anything like this, Robert, but the knock from Republicans and from Democrats on libertarians is that they're selfish. Have you heard that?
Yes, and let's answer that.
Can you? Yeah,
Let's answer that
please.
directly. Ayn Rand wrote a brilliant book that I hope everybody will read, not Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead.
Right.
And in that book, she identifies...
Is that the one that made it, they made it into a movie too?
The movie is horrible, don't watch it.
Okay.
Read the book is brilliant. The
Okay.
book outlines, it has origin stories of several people, neutral people, good people, and a villain, several villains. It shows how they reached their view of the world, and it identifies two categories. I think she uses the word selfishness in a different way than most of us do, as a contrast to altruism. Where altruism, she outlines as the greatest evil in the world. Why? Altruism is not just donating something to the community or acting in goodwill. Altruism is self-sacrifice. He's saying that you have no self. You're a cog. You're like a bee in a bee colony, and there is a queen that deserves to be fed. And after you feed that queen, you should wither and die. If it should, the society, the state, the party, everything is towards the state. Nothing is outside the state. That's a collectivist, altruist idea. That you, as a member of society, this is the fascist idea. You need to donate your entire self to the community without asking anything back. That you don't have the self. The self has to be destroyed. Ayn Rand's conception is that the exact opposite should be pursued, meaning ultimate selfishness, but not stupid selfishness, not short-term high time preference selfishness, meaning you should see it to your benefit personally to have a healthy family. You should see it to your benefit personally to protect the society from viruses and to wear a mask when you're sick. That is smart selfishness. But what the allegation from the Democrats is, why don't you sacrifice for us? Right? Why don't you sacrifice for us? We know better what to do with your time. We know better and how you should spend your life. The big mother knows what's best for her son. And the Republican message is often, Big Daddy knows what's best too. He knows how the son should behave. And probably as a father, that's both of these approaches, the super mother and the super father, are sometimes incorrect. The truth is that within the law and within Christian morality, your son and your daughter and other people independent of you should have free will to do what they want. And your influence over them should be to appeal to their sense of self. They say, son, if you want to respect yourself in 20 years, you understand that the greatest amount of self-respect you will gain is by having your own son. Your life should be geared towards establishing a family, society, community. That is, the ultimate value. And you don't have to sacrifice yourself for it. You have to find your place where you're most effective in the community. The word sacrifice shouldn't be there because it is all reciprocal. And I think that's also a misconception, possibly. I'm not a Christian, but I wouldn't be surprised if if a Christian priest, if a church father would disagree with me, that you should believe that the faith and your good works are beneficial to yourself. And if you didn't believe that, if you believe that you're doing it against your will, then you're not a true believer. You don't truly believe that Jesus is your savior. There's some perverse incentive there. You're treating yourself as a slave, but you're not a slave. You are in fact coming freely into the embrace of the church and the faith.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
This is why there is the period of catechumenism. And so notice how the neocons in the conservative circle demand that you sacrifice for other countries. we need to establish democracy in the Middle East, save our greatest ally, which, my family is some of my family is in Israel, but I don't want people to sacrifice for that. If they want to go fight there or donate money, they should do it voluntarily. It should happen through some kind of a trade, not as harnessing the work of various people against their will to save somebody. It's not libertarian,
right?
And it's not Christian, and it's deeply immoral. The Democratic Party is doing the same thing. It says you should sacrifice yourself for the victim group.
Yeah.
And so I think it is tragic that Ayn Rand identified Christianity as an enemy, and many objectivists today still do, because they view Christianity as one more altruistic collectivist ideology. But I don't think it has to be. I think any ideology can dip into that, just sacrifice for me stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the context.
Yeah, and it's always nice to hear from you, Kaz. And I'll be honest, it's a little cheat code here, like at 25 hours here, to leave Kaz come on and talk for a while. So it really helped you through. I really appreciate it. We're going to let you go here. Is there anything you want to shout out? Anything you want to say going into the election here? Or
the election is anyone who tells you it's not libertarian to vote is a liar. Vote for Trump. If you're smart enough to listen to this and hear my words, vote for Trump. We'll criticize later. Right now, let's give ourselves a break of 4 years before we have full-blown communism, right? Let's buy more bullets. Let's print more guns. Let's buy. Have you considered buying a lathe? Have you considered buying a lathe? You should. Robotics are wonderful. Your garage should have a lathe. If you can't afford one yourself, create a crafting circle in your community and combine resources. And the other thing is, if you're interested in true libertarianism, in like hardcore, the best creator is Liquid Zulu, my friend, the annoying guy that's debated Jay Dyer. I can tell you, in his videos, he's much more easy to understand. He has a great video that's blowing up again right now on AI art. If you don't understand the topic of AI and you don't understand the topic of art, he explains both of them in that video. So I'm a huge advocate. Met the guy in real life recently for the first time ever. We were at the Haas against Pragsben, another great creator debate, actually, live. Great experience. So Pragsben for libertarian empirics is like the Rob Neuer of libertarianism. And Liquid Zulu, I'm shouting out those two guys. Go check out their stuff. Eventually check out my stuff.
What's your Twitter?
My Twitter is free Kasimir.
I'll get the link up too. So, Kaz, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you. And you have no idea how much I appreciate it. You came on twice, particularly these wee hours of the morning. I knew it'd be tough. So thanks so much, man.
Great meeting you.
Thank you very much. Mutual. Take care.
Take care.